Thank you very much. And yes, it's nice to be on the platform with fellow social workers, and also very nice to be here. So thank you very much for inviting me to come and speak at this conference. I thought, in terms of just summarising what I'm going to talk about, I thought that in choosing this theme, because I looked at the programme and realised that you would be hearing as an audience quite a lot about evidence. So I thought it would be useful to spend a bit of time just reflecting on, well, how do we make use of evidence to actually improve what goes on in practice and therefore to help to improve the lives of people who are living with dementia. But I thought we probably, just needed to spend a little bit of time talking about why is evidence important before we went on to thinking about, well then, how do you use that evidence? And then a very brief look at the kinds of resources and support that's around to do that. So, to get on to this question about, well, why is evidence important? Because we sort of tend to assume that everybody thinks that it is. But actually, people may well think that their own experience or what someone's told them is just as important. So why is it important? One of the things that evidence does is it helps to inform our judgments. It's always, I think, really helpful to remember that it's we, the people we're working with, people with dementia, their families, really a bit as Baroness Findlay was talking about, they're the people who are making the decisions about their lives, not the evidence. But the evidence helps to inform judgments. And I've always liked this judgment, this sort of definition of judgments as being those decisions that don't make themselves. So evidence can be really helpful when you're faced with tricky situations and tricky decisions. It also helps to inspire confidence. Several years ago, it was when I was working at SCIE, I was in a taxi driver asked me what I did. So I gave a quick thumbnail sketch of what SCIE does in relation to finding out what works and, encouraging and helping people to use that in social care and social services. And he didn't turn around, fortunately, because he was driving. But what he did say was, oh, that's very sensible, because that's really what should be happening. And so I think there's something about the way it can inspire confidence. We also need to think very much about the voice of service users and carers, and of that being part of the evidence, either because we do research or we use research which tells us about those views on a kind of largish scale, or we work very closely with people to listen to what they're telling us. So those are the reasons I think why evidence is important. And then we need to think a little bit about that, going back to that first question. How does it help me to do what I have to do? People working in health and social care services actually in many ways a very practical audience. So how does it help me to do what I have to do? So in thinking about that, it's useful to think about what evidence can tell you. We have a slight tendency to think that evidence is really only about the first thing in that list. In other words, it's about what works, what's effective, trying to find some proof about that. But actually, you can find evidence, and evidence can help you with all sorts of other decisions. So you can find evidence about the sorts of approaches that might be helpful, things that people are trying out, and that therefore you as a commissioner might want to invest in. For example, what Ruth was telling us about. Evidence can also tell you a lot about what is going wrong in your services and what is going well. One of the things we do a lot of now at SCIE is do audits. That tells people a lot, and it is evidence. And the other thing that evidence can do is help you understand a problem better and help you identify solutions. So there are lots of ways in which evidence can help people practically, and in a sense, our job has been to bring that together for people. And in doing that, you draw on a range of sources. I've talked about people who use services, their carers and families, but also obviously you draw on the research evidence and you draw on evidence from practice and services. And I've used this slide quite a bit before. I often think that using evidence is a little bit like the grit in the oyster. It can be a bit tricky, it can be a bit challenging, it can be very helpful, but it really can help you, get towards that pearl. So it's that sort of mixture of sort of helpfulness and sometimes a bit of difficulty and discomfort. So, I'm not going to go through this. The bit I wanted to highlight here as I go on to talk about the sort of resources that then we have and that are across, confined this a bit to the social care sector because that's the sector I work in and know about, to help people use evidence in the ways I've described to inform, develop and improve services. The thing I wanted to highlight here really is the sort of last bullet point on the slide, which talks about a range of services, all of which are ways of getting evidence out into practice. You've got training, you've got actually doing research and audit in organisations, because that helps people to learn to use evidence. And you've got resources for improvement support. Because one of the things that we know is that there are quite a lot of barriers to people using evidence to improve practice. There's time, there's money, there's finding it, there's the evidence being available in a form that makes it easy to use, that's understandable, that's all in one place. Lots of things that can make it difficult, especially when that evidence might actually come from a fairly disparate range of resources. So, the first example that I wanted to talk about, which is a resource that SCIE provides, is our Dementia Gateway. And what that gateway does is bring together information, resources and learning about a whole range of aspects of living with dementia. And it is very much geared to the person's experience of living with dementia, and if you like, thinking a bit about that journey for people in terms of the way it pulls together those resources. So that, if you like, answers the question about getting things all in one place for people, making it easier, both for people working in services and people who are using services and their carers and their families to get hold of those resources. And the reason for sort of breaking it up in the way it's broken up sort of acknowledges that people are going to be at different stages at different times. So you need to try and organise what you're offering in a way that speaks to that. Not always perfect, but that's one way of doing it. Another thing that I wanted to talk about, a very different kind of resource, are the NICE social care guidelines, which we develop for NICE in our work as the NICE Collaborating Centre for Social Care. And what I think those guidelines do, the example I've put up there is in home care, because obviously home care is a service that a lot of people with dementia use. But what the guidelines try to do is present the recommendations in very specific action-orientated fashion. So the work that is done there is to say, well, okay, here's the evidence. What does it mean for practice? So if the evidence says, as is here, actually continuity is really important, okay, what does that then mean if I'm running a home care service? And then there's a sort of series of things that people can do to ensure that continuity. So that's very much about really trying to drill down into what are the implications of the evidence for practice. So a very different kind of resource to support improvement. And the final one I wanted to talk about was the resource that's called Care Improvement Works. And again, this is something that we at SCIE developed with our colleagues at Skills for Care. It's specifically geared towards providers of social care. We've tried in the organisation of the resource to link it to the inspection frameworks, because again, what people sometimes say is, I don't understand how this fits in with everything else. And it's very much a signposting resource to other things that help people with that. The final resource I'd mentioned before finishing is we have something called the Prevention Library, which is a really nice example of how you bring together the research evidence with emerging practice and examples from practice for people to use in the area of prevention. So I think what I've tried to do there is just say there are a lot of ways in which people can use evidence for improvement, and there are a lot of resources, not only SCIE's but also a number of other organisations that can help to do that. And I sort of hope that then helps us all think a bit about how we can use the terrific material that we're hearing about from people on the platform today. So thank you very much indeed.